Dear academics, my name is Alexandra Chudinova. I'm the founder of the Foundation for Academics. And today we are talking about a conceptual model of ethics by Dr. Amine Moussa. So Dr. Amine Moussa is a lecturer, business advisor, leadership consultant, and a higher education management professional. He received a doctorate degree from the University of Bath, Department of Business Administration in Higher Education Management. So my pleasure and honor to Dr. Amine Moussa for visiting us today. And let's give a word to Dr. Amine Moussa.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexandra. And let me thank your platform, the Foundation for Academics, for hosting me. I really appreciate this opportunity to discuss my research with you and to share my research about ethical leadership with your wide audience. So thanks again for this great opportunity.
Great. And I prepared six questions about this very interesting and great, I think, conceptual model of ethics to Dr. Amine Moussa. And let's start with our first question. Please, audience, my pleasure for visiting us today. Give us the commentaries, your questions, and we will be glad to answer you to these questions. All links and also the link to this publication, which we are talking right now, you can find in the description below. So first question. We have, according to your model, 4 main components. And so all questions have this separation, including each sector, each model of your big conceptual model. So first question is about ethical leadership. Who are the ethical leaders in the academic environment and what makes them ethical?
Okay, thank you for that question, especially when we combine ethical leadership and higher education. Well, I would like first to go back to Brown's definition of ethical leadership. Brown published a very prominent article where they defined ethical leadership, and they divided ethical leadership into 2 different pillars or 2 different dimensions, those being the moral person and the moral manager. And for that, I'd like to share a graph with the audience so that they can know better what I'm talking about. So let me share this graph, which was developed by. Can you see my screen? Let me share it.
Yes.
Okay, so as you can see, ethical leadership has 2 pillars. And this will help us understand who the ethical leaders are when we think about ethical leaders, which refers directly to your question. So we have the moral person and we have the moral manager. And when we designate someone as an ethical leader, we really want them to be moral on their personal level, that is their personal lives, as well as moral on their management side, the side that we see at work or in the corporate context or in my research in the higher education context. So for moral person, we're talking about those traits such as integrity, such as honesty, such as trustworthiness. We are looking at behaviors, doing the right thing, their concern for people, being open to listen to feedback, their personal morality, as well as the decision-making side of their personal morality. We can talk about them holding to values, not changing their values, being objective, being fair with everyone, their concern for society, and that they follow ethical decision rules. Now, when we move into the moral manager side, which is the side that we're supposed to see in the work environment, we're talking about these ethical leaders behaving as role models through their visible actions. So they have actions that are visible, and through these actions, they become role models to the others, especially to their followers. We also talk about the rewards and discipline system. So they get to reward proper behavior, but they also have to discipline bad behavior. And this is distinguished from other types of leaders who maybe they would only reward good behavior or they would only discipline bad behavior without any rewards on the other side. And third, we talk about them communicating all the time about ethics and values. So ethics and values don't only exist in their mind, It's not only an internal value. They're always vocal about these. They always talk about ethics. They talk about values. Whenever there's a meeting, whenever they're gathering their followers to make any decisions or to reach decisions, they always make sure that the ethical part is there. They always question whether the decision they are making or taking has ethical consequences, right? So basically, this is in a nutshell the pillars of ethical leadership. And back to your question, this is how we define who ethical leaders are.
Mhm. Okay, so as I remember, it's kind of horizontal model, but here it's kind of maybe detailed description of your
Yeah, yeah.
one common scheme. The second question is about ethical climate. What is the difference between an ethical environment and ethical climate? Do you consider negative and positive changes as the values of ethical climate?
Thank you for that question as well. So many confuse between the ethical environment and the ethical climate. And putting it academically, I would say ethical culture rather than ethical environment. So in literature, we see the distinction between culture and climate. Um, Let me go to this graph here. So the ethical culture, or what you are referring to as the ethical environment, this refers to the organization's formal and informal systems and procedures that guide the ethical behavior. So basically, in every work culture, in every setting, we have two systems. We have the formal system, by which the organization is running, and we have an informal system. And the combination of these two makes up the ethical culture or environment. Now, the formal system, we're talking about the selection system that is used in this corporation or in this higher education institution, how we select our employees. That's part of the formal system. We're talking about policies, codes, the written part. We're talking about orientation and training for new employees. We're talking about the performance management, how that is done. We're talking about the authority structure, who reports to who. We're also talking about the decision process and how decisions are reached. Now, that's for the formal system. If we move to the other end, the informal systems, and here we're talking about the norms that are not actually written, that's why they are informal. The rituals, what we do, what we're used to doing, what we're not used to doing, what goes, what doesn't go in this work environment, the myth and the stories. So every work culture, every workspace, they have their own stories, they have their own myth, they have their own kind of language, the technical language, the slang that they use, the type of language, the way they communicate. All this forms the informal system. Now, the ethical culture is actually the combination and the alignment of the formal systems with the informal systems, and both of these being ethical. So that's for the ethical culture. And when we say ethical culture, we're talking about a very deep, structured culture within the workspace. When we compare this to the ethical climate, I'm going to move to the next slide. When you compare this to the ethical climate, we can define the ethical climate as the collective personality of the organization, the collective personality. And here we're talking about investigating ethics related attitudes, perceptions, decision making process. Uh, as well, it includes several dimensions, and it consists of shared beliefs about what constitutes right behavior. Some academics define the ethical climate as compared to the culture, saying that the culture is more of the foundation of the workspace, whereas climate is what you, say, as Alexandra, get to see whenever you walk in any office or any new company or any corporation. So when you walk in, you're taking a tour around the offices. What you see, what you hear, and what you observe, this is the ethical climate. You don't get to see, you don't get to observe the ethical culture right away. The ethical culture is so embedded that you need to work there for some time to realize what the culture is about. What you see directly, what you can observe directly, the sounds that you hear, this is the ethical climate. We can also compare it to a climate of a country and the culture of a country. So you are from Russia, right? It's extremely hard to change the Russian culture, but we know that the Russian climate changes from one day to the other, or from one season to the other. So climate is more changeable, just like the climate of any country, whereas culture is deeply embedded and it's hard to change the culture. So what Russia has as a culture, this is deep, this is extremely hard to change, right? And it lives throughout the ages, whereas the climate changes from one season to the other. So the climate is the more observable thing. It's the more tangible thing that we see whenever we walk in, whenever we're visiting some offices. So basically, what you get to observe, that's the ethical climate. Now, speaking of the ethical climate, let me share this as well. If I refer back to Victor and Cullen's ethical climate matrix, you can see on the left side, we have the ethical criteria by which we can measure the climate, and then we have the locus of analysis on top. I'm not going to go into details, but it's good for our viewers to understand how the climate is actually formed. When we talk about the ethical criteria, we distinguish between a principle climate, a benevolence climate, and an egoism climate. And we also distinguish between the different loci of analysis. Some individuals, they are self-focused, and that goes under the individual analysis. Then we have the local analysis, and we have the cosmopolitan analysis. I'm going to take just a few examples. For example, if I want to mix between egoism as an ethical criteria and the individual locus of analysis, obviously the result would be a very self-centered climate where everyone is all about themselves, and this we call the self-interest climate. If we take a bigger focus, a bigger lens, and we look at the local locus of analysis, where we're referring to the company itself. And here we have all the focus is centered around the company profit, right? For example, if you wanna take benevolence and individual, so you have individual employees who have a tendency of being benevolent, and this ends up in a friendship or caring climate. Whereas if we look at it from a local lens rather than an individual lens, we end up with a team interest. So the team is very benevolent, it's very caring, and you end up with a team interest climate. This is basically the climate that we are talking about. And we could talk for hours about climate. It's a very deep, wide, and broad topic. But basically, this is what we refer to as climate, as opposed to culture, ethical culture.
Yes, thank you very much for very detailed explanation. And I think it sounds democratic if we're talking about Russian climate. So let's speak about knowledge collecting. Do you consider this process by the side of academics or students also? Should all collected materials be ethical, and how to identify them?
Yeah. So in my research, I was talking about and examining the higher education management side. So I was looking at the management part, upper administration, management, faculty, and staff. I did not examine the student behavior in this regard. So the knowledge collecting part has to do with the administration, with the management, with staff, and with academics. And knowledge sharing itself, as can be seen in my publication, knowledge sharing is divided into knowledge collecting and knowledge donating. And I did that on purpose. I refer to literature that examines knowledge sharing as two different behaviors. Because as we know, as human beings, some of us are very good at collecting knowledge from others, but they are extremely difficult to share knowledge. So they collect knowledge, but they rarely donate knowledge. Whereas others are very good at donating knowledge and collecting knowledge. So basically, we can define knowledge sharing, human knowledge sharing, based on these two elements: knowledge collecting and knowledge donating. Now, your question for knowledge collecting, we were looking at collecting information, collecting documents, collecting knowledge as well, collecting experience, any sort of knowledge collecting. The elements of collecting, we examined, so basically we examined documents, collecting documents, we examined collecting, say, knowledge, how things are done here, any sort of knowledge sharing.
Mhm.
Uh, and I also looked at knowledge sharing from a moral lens because the way I approached this topic, being it related to ethical leadership, is considering knowledge sharing in itself an ethical behavior. And it really takes high standards of ethics for people to really share knowledge on the two parallel sides, which is knowledge collecting and knowledge donating, because we would not consider knowledge collecting alone as knowledge sharing. That's
Mhm.
knowledge collecting, whereas sharing has to involve the donation part, the knowledge donation part.
So it is a communicative process. Um,
Absolutely. It's a two-way thing.
about knowledge donating, do you agree that in the model, the process of collecting should be vertically connected? Should the knowledge receiving process be verified? Could it be an administrative responsibility by the academic side?
That's a very interesting question, especially when you say whether it has to be vertically connected. Um, And I think what you're really referring to is respecting the hierarchy in the environment and sharing upwards and sharing downwards. Now that in itself is a wide topic because leadership is directly connected and related to knowledge sharing in that regard in the vertical direction, let me say. So I also acknowledge that the vertical part has to be respected when it comes to knowledge sharing, but I have to emphasize that besides the vertical part, we also need to look at the horizontal part because my research actually has led me to conclude that if you have an ethical leader on top, it's a very big push towards the knowledge sharing activity within the team. So it works vertically and it works horizontally. An ethical leader would actually encourage knowledge sharing within team members. So team members among themselves, they tend to share knowledge because what they see when it comes to leadership is actually an ethical leader that allows knowledge sharing and that encourages knowledge sharing and that perhaps punishes knowledge hiding. So that's on the horizontal side. On the vertical side, an ethical leader would also encourage sharing knowledge vertically. That is, the team shares knowledge with the ethical leader and vice versa. Let me compare and contrast this with a leader who always punishes mistakes. So if you have a leader who's always punishing you for making mistakes on a certain project, thinking about it, on the long run, you will tend not to share knowledge with the leader because you tend to be anxious and afraid. Maybe the knowledge you are sharing has mistakes, right? Or maybe you have questions that you are supposed to know and that you shouldn't come to your authoritarian leader to ask. So, on the long run, such an authoritarian leader, I'm just taking one leadership example, such a leader would actually cause knowledge hiding because you would hesitate time and time again to bring that knowledge to your leader and discuss it with him or her.
Mm-hmm. It's right. I think so. It's very great concept, and also about cross line. And also you can find, I think, interesting different directions what can be included in your model. So like a
Absolutely.
lot of things to talk about ethical behavior. And could
Mm,
I have an artistic question?
mhm.
Could you draw by words the ethical portrait of an academic person, leader?
Yeah, yeah. That's that's an exciting question, especially at this time. So, what's an ethical academic? What's an ethical academic? Be it a manager, be it a teacher, an instructor, a professor. I want to go back to my or to the definition that I adopted in my research and which I really believe in is the holistic ethical person slash manager. In our case, the holistic ethical academic, being the holistic ethical person and the ethical manager, and in our case, the ethical academic. So, I mean, in my mind, I would be looking at a person who is honest, who is trustworthy, um, who respects others, who is fair when it comes to decision making. And on the manager side, I would be looking at, on the moral manager side, I would be looking at someone who is fair at work, um, who allows the followers, or in this case, for example, the research team, to voice their concerns, who sets the rules and the policies, who is able to reward proper behavior, but as well to punish wrong behavior. And in this case, an ethical academic would reward and punish equally, because that sets the tone for what ethics is all about in this workplace. If you have a team that you are always rewarding for good work but never disciplining, you wouldn't have ethics. You wouldn't have an ethical environment. And if you're always punishing, that has nothing to do with ethics, right? If your leader, in our case, the academic, is always punishing you, that is so far away from ethical leadership,
I think it's
right?
an actual question. Yes, it's about discipline, tradition, and freedoms for sure. So yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And of course, I mean, if we want to take it context specific, want to look at it context specific, we need to have an element of accountability, especially in research. So having research being genuine, being authentic, if you're working in a team, respecting the role of others, as well as having others respect your role in the research project or undertaking. So all that has to do with ethics. Ethics is such a big world to look at. And I mean, it takes hours and hours and hours to cover. Sometimes it's debatable. Sometimes ethics, let me add this here. Sometimes ethics is context dependent, and this is
Mhm.
debatable as well. So maybe what goes in your context as being ethical does not go in my context, and that's why the
Mhm.
ethical leader has to set the standards for the ethical leadership. So has to set the standards of what goes and what doesn't go. It has to be agreed upon, right? Because changing the context where you're working, may it be another country, maybe another continent, we all know that some things could be ethical in one place, but they could be considered unethical in somewhere else. For example, a leader using a loud voice to 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 order their team to do something, right? Loud voice in itself in some cultures is considered unethical and unpolite and impolite,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I'm agree with you about the context. It's very important in like verbal and also if we're talking about the discourse. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm,
Um,
mhm,
what perspectives do you see in ethics at higher education?
mhm, mhm. Um, this is actually growing, I have to say, especially in research. So if we do a quick literature review on ethical leadership in higher education, on ethics in higher education, we see that great emphasis is being placed on this topic in particular. So when I did my research, there was a certain amount of research that was conducted. But I mean, as time goes, we see that this research is growing, that people pushing the agenda for ethics in higher education, this is growing as well. And that's for a reason. And that's for a reason. I mean, we have so many ethical scandals at universities. I mean, if we just quickly Google ethical scandals plus universities, you'll end up with many ethical scandals, especially in the last 10 or 20 years.
Yeah.
And this raises the need for more research on ethics in higher education, for more implementation of ethics in higher education, and for enforcing the ethical items on every agenda. Because from my observation, from my research, I've noticed that ethics is rarely there on the agenda, on any meeting agenda. So meetings and objectives and strategies are all about achieving the goals of this institution or that institution, but you rarely see ethics available or present on a purpose statement, on an objective, on a mission, on a vision. It's always about achieving the goals. My research, as well as many others, is pushing the agenda for having ethics being placed as an objective.
Mhm.
And I could say that my research was also able to show that ethical leadership can help the organization reach the same outcomes had it adopted a different type of leadership. And this is a counter argument because some say that with ethical leadership, you wouldn't be able to achieve great results because ethics would actually restrict your movement if you want to be too ethical. My research was able to show that no, you could use ethical leadership, and with this style of leadership, you will be able to reach the same objectives as you would with any other type of leadership. So here is a proof. Here is one proof to tell you that let's push the agenda for ethics and ethical leadership in higher education specifically.
Yes, I think it's like very prospective direction. You're right. And also, if
Yeah.
you're talking about how to identify an academic style, it's for sure like ethical leadership. So my pleasure to Dr. Amine Moussa for this interview and very interesting research. And my pleasure to our audience for the commentaries and questions. So that's at the end of our interview. Again, my pleasure and honor to meet you again next time. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you for the Foundation for Academics for this great platform. I think it's a great idea what you're doing. I know there's big effort behind this. I know that such videos and such with such audience can really help push the academic research forward and can really make academic research more practical so that everyone can use it, not only academics. It can simplify what we're doing, the complicated things what we're doing. We can simplify it in simple words on your very prestigious platform. So I really want to thank you, Alexandra, for taking this initiative and for inviting me. I'm really honored to be on this platform.
My pleasure for this really good sports. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.